Her son claimed she was losing her mind, right there at the Medicare counter. Elaine Mercer, 74, retired ICU nurse and widow, didn't flinch. Brian smirked like her fate was already filed and notarized. But by sundown, he was erased from her will, her access files, and every legal foothold he thought was permanent. She'd spent decades saving lives. Now she was saving her own. And when he came back with lawyers and lies, her records were waiting. Before we begin, may I ask, where in this big, beautiful world are you listening from? It's always a quiet honor to know who's sharing this space. Drop it in the comments and don't forget to subscribe. The fluorescent lights in the Medicare office hummed with a steady, nerve-grating persistence. Elaine Mercer sat stiffly on the molded plastic bench, her wool coat zipped up despite the overheated room. She hated places like this, sanitized, impersonal, built to funnel people like livestock. But it was necessary. Paperwork always was. Beside her, Brian tapped impatiently at his phone, thumb jabbing the screen like it owed him something. He hadn't said much during the car ride, just the usual brusque updates about gas prices and how bad the roads were. January in Michigan could be cruel, but Elaine had weathered worse. When the receptionist called, "Mercer?" Elaine stood quickly, knees creaking, but her posture firm. Brian followed a step behind, his breath already fogging up his glasses. The clerk, a young woman with frizzed curls and a crisp badge that read Lisa, greeted them with a bureaucratic smile. "How can I help you today?" Elaine opened her folder and began, "I'm here to update my Medicare contact information. I moved recently and—" "She can't make decisions anymore," Brian said. The words sliced through the air like ice cracking. Elaine turned toward him, her heart pausing in its rhythm. Lisa blinked. "Excuse me?" Brian leaned in slightly, voice calmer now, as if explaining something obvious to a child. "My mother's had some memory issues lately. Confusion. She's been forgetting names, appointments, basic stuff. I think it's time someone helped manage things." Elaine stared at him. "What are you doing?" Brian didn't look at her. He kept his eyes on Lisa, like Elaine wasn't even in the room. "We'd like to file for an update to her authorized representative. I'm her current power of attorney." "You're not," Elaine said, voice quiet but sharp. Lisa looked between them, clearly caught off guard. Her eyebrows crept up just slightly, enough to register alarm or suspicion. "Ma'am, do you currently have someone listed as your agent under your Medicare file?" Elaine exhaled slowly, steadying the tremble in her fingers. She reached for her purse, unclasped the top, and pulled out a thick, neatly folded packet with a blue tab peeking from the edge. "My living will," she said, sliding it forward, "and a notarized power of attorney form, updated 2 months ago." Brian's smirk, which had started to curl at the edges of his mouth when they first approached the desk, vanished like vapor. Lisa took the packet and began to skim the first page. Her expression sobered. "This lists a Danielle Marston as your power of attorney." "My niece," Elaine confirmed. "She teaches high school science, hasn't stolen anything from me, which is a plus." Brian stepped forward. "Mom, come on. This isn't about theft. It's about safety. You've been making erratic choices." "I'm 74, Brian, not 4. Elaine's tone was level, not loud, but it cut through his protest like a scalpel. "And I have not been diagnosed with anything, not by a doctor, not by a court, and certainly not by you." Lisa held up her hands. "Okay, I'm not a judge here. I just need to confirm what's legally on file. And this," she tapped the folder, "overrides anything previously submitted?" Elaine nodded. "Then let's fix the paperwork. And remove his name." Brian stared at her, stunned for the first time. The color in his face drained, leaving behind something brittle and pale. "I drove you here," he said under his breath. "I rearranged my schedule." "I didn't ask you to come," Elaine said, keeping her gaze on Lisa. "He invited himself." Lisa typed something into her terminal, the clacking of the keys underscoring the thick silence. After a moment, she looked up. "All right. We'll make the changes. Is there anything else I can assist you with today?" Elaine glanced at Brian, then back to the clerk. "Number, that'll do just fine." They walked out of the office side by side, but not together. Brian's steps were tight, restrained, like a man trying to keep himself from snapping a pencil in half. Elaine, meanwhile, felt the rush of cold air as the automatic doors slid open and let it fill her lungs. The snow had begun to fall again. As they stepped into the gray Michigan afternoon, Brian finally turned to her. His voice was quiet, calculated. "You're going to regret this." Elaine didn't respond. Not yet. But in her purse, beneath, the folder and wallet, her fingers curled around a pen. She was just getting started. It had started with the casserole dish. A week after Charles's funeral, Brian showed up uninvited with a pan of baked ziti and an overly cheerful voice, like grief could be absorbed and dismissed in a single reheated meal. Elaine accepted it with a tight smile, placed it on the counter, and never took off the foil. They sat across from each other at the kitchen table. Brian talked too fast and too loud, filling the air with job market complaints and confusing tax talk, pausing only to check his phone. He didn't ask how she was. He didn't mention Charles, not once. Instead, his fingers drummed against the table until finally he leaned in and said, "We need to get ahead of things, Mom, before something goes wrong." Elaine sipped her tea. "Something like?" He shrugged, trying to look casual, but his eyes were too sharp. "Bills? The house? I could help with the accounts, just temporarily. You don't need to be bogged down with all that." She watched the steam rise from her cup, let the silence press against him. "I'm fine handling it." His expression shifted, just barely. That flash of frustration, like a child denied a second cookie. He masked it quickly. "I'm just saying, if something did happen, we should be ready." Elaine smiled, slow and polite. "We are." That night, long after he left and the untouched ziti went into the garbage, Elaine sat at the dining room table with a yellow legal pad and her husband's old fountain pen. The fireplace crackled quietly behind her as she made a list. "Contact Medicare update living will remove Brian as POA call Danielle." She underlined the last item twice. The next week, she walked into the Medicare office with a small folder tucked against her side and Danielle by her shoulder. Danielle, with her earnest eyes and ink-stained fingers, still smelled faintly of dry erase markers and winter wind. "You sure you want to do this now?" Danielle had asked in the parking lot. Elaine had nodded, her voice calm. "There's a window after death. People either step in to help or they step in to take." Inside, a different clerk, older than Lisa but no less guarded, watched quietly as Elaine laid out the documents on the counter. Her late husband's death certificate, her original living will, and the freshly printed amendment forms. Elaine filled out the new directive by hand, her pen moving steadily. When she reached the section for power of attorney, she paused only for a breath, then wrote, "Danielle Marston." Danielle shifted beside her, uneasy. "Are you sure?" Elaine didn't look up. "You're calm, organized, honest. You don't want anything from me. I want you safe." "That's enough." The clerk stamped the papers, slid them into a bright blue envelope, and handed Elaine a copy with a soft, "all set." It felt final. Good final. 2 days later, Brian came by again. Elaine hadn't invited him, but the familiar screech of his brakes gave him away. He knocked once before letting himself in with the old key Charles had given him years ago. She met him at the door, hand already on the knob. "You don't live here." "I'm just checking on things." "You can call." He stepped inside anyway, looked around like he owned the place. "I saw the new POA form," he said, voice low. "Danielle? Seriously?" Elaine closed the door slowly behind him. "She has a full-time job, pays her bills, and doesn't treat me like a liability." "You blindsided me," he said, tone darkening. "Dad always said I'd take care of things when the time came." Elaine's mouth tightened. "He also said a man shows his character in how he handles grief." That hit something. Brian looked like he might speak, then shook his head. "You made a mistake," he muttered. "You'll see." He turned to go, but she stopped him at the threshold. "Don't bring casseroles when you're really serving paperwork." He froze for a beat, then walked out into the brittle cold. Elaine watched from the doorway, arms folded tight. The snow had hardened since morning, forming a thin crust across the steps. When she closed the door, she didn't lock it immediately. Instead, she went to the kitchen, opened the drawer beneath the bills, and pulled out the key Charles had given Brian years ago. She dropped it in the garbage disposal, turned the switch. The metal screamed. The wind bit hard as Elaine stepped off the curb and onto the slushy parking lot. The sky had darkened while they were inside. Michigan afternoons in January folded fast into dusk. Snow had begun to crust over the windshield of her Corolla. Brian was already there, arms folded, leaning against the side of his car like he'd been waiting hours. His breath fogged in quick puffs, jaw clenched tight. She half expected him to launch into a tirade before her boots even hit the pavement. Instead, he let the silence settle first. Then, "You really think that clerk understood what you just signed?" Elaine kept walking. "I understood." He stepped into her path. "You think this is smart? Cutting me out like I don't know how things work?" She tilted her head, appraising him. "You mean finances?" Brian scoffed. "Don't play cute, Mom. Taxes, investments, health directives, asset transfer. This isn't your wheelhouse." Her eyes narrowed. "I was an ICU nurse for 30 years. I've handled DNR orders, crash carts, and watched men half your age die with less whining. I think I can manage a checking account." Brian's lips parted slightly. Offended, surprised, maybe both. His gaze darted toward the office behind them, as if he were calculating how much of this someone inside could hear. "You're being reckless," he said, voice lower now. "You don't know how fast things can spiral. What if Danielle gets overwhelmed? What if someone takes advantage of her?" Elaine raised an eyebrow. "She hasn't asked for access to my accounts. You did." He tried again, softening the edges of his voice, shifting into that old familiarity he used back in high school when he'd cracked her rearview mirror and needed her to smooth it over with Charles. "I'm just trying to look out for you." "Number you're trying to look in. There's a difference." He stepped closer, his boots crunching the salted snow. "She's been feeding you things, getting in your ear. You've always been too trusting." Elaine didn't flinch. "She listens. That's different from manipulation. And it sounds like you're describing yourself." That did it. The mask slipped for just a second. Brian's mouth twisted. Not in rage, but something worse. Contempt. "You've never been good with money. Dad handled everything. And now you're going to let a high school teacher play accountant?" She didn't break eye contact. "Danielle's never lied to me about a layoff, or a foreclosure, or bounced checks I had to cover." Color bloomed in his cheeks then, fast and hot. His breath came heavier now, little clouds puffing out into the air between them. "I lost my job because the company folded, not because I'm irresponsible." "You lost it because you took liberties you weren't supposed to. That wasn't the company's fault." Brian's eyes flashed. "So this is about punishing me." Elaine opened her car door, calm and slow. "Number, this is about protecting me." He took a step closer. Too close. The snow crunched again beneath his heel. "You're going to regret cutting me out," he said, voice flat now. Cold. Elaine stared at him over the top of her car door. "That sounds like a threat." He didn't answer. A long, heavy moment passed between them. Finally, Elaine slid into her seat and pulled the door shut with a clean, mechanical thud. Brian stood there as she reversed out, his figure growing smaller in the rearview mirror, but not less dangerous. She didn't breathe easy until she turned onto the main road, but even then, something in her gut stayed tight. Not fear, not yet, but anticipation. Like a nurse watching the monitor before the numbers crash. The envelope was thick, stamped personal and confidential, and slid through Elaine's mail slot on a Wednesday morning like a blade in an envelope. She almost didn't notice it. She was midway through slicing a grapefruit in the kitchen, hands steady, mind already in her grocery list. It wasn't until her boot caught the corner of the manila flap on the way to the front door that she saw the courthouse return address. Her chest tightened before she even opened it. In the matter of Elaine Mercer, petition for appointment of guardian of the person and estate, emergency motion filed. She stood motionless in her foyer for several seconds, the paper trembling only slightly in her fingers. Not with age, not with weakness, with fury. In a narrow column of fine print allegations, Brian had described her as mentally diminished. frequently disoriented, and susceptible to external manipulation. The lines crawled with insinuations she didn't recognize, woven through with cherry-picked dates and distorted facts. He'd even claimed she'd missed medical appointments he hadn't known existed, and near the bottom of the filing, in a cold summary of justification, a citation to a supposed doctor's concern about increasing cognitive decline. Dr. Harold Levin. Elaine narrowed her eyes and reached for her cordless phone. By noon, she was seated across from Dr. Levin himself, coat still dusted with salt and snow. "I never wrote that," he said flatly, reading the copy she'd slid across his desk. "Never said it either." He looked at her over the rim of his glasses. "You scored in the top percentile on your annual cognitive screen. I told you that personally." "You did," Elaine said. Her voice was calm, but her jaw was locked like a bolted door. Levin leaned back. "Is your son trying to put you in a home?" Elaine gave a half-smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Not quite, but he's trying to own the keys." That night, she called Danielle. "I need a lawyer," she said simply, "and a notebook." Danielle was at her door the next morning, bundled against the frost and holding both. Elaine began the log on a fresh page in the lined spiral Danielle had brought. She noted the date, what time she woke up, what medication she took, what groceries she ordered, what she paid, who she spoke to. She documented the weather, the headlines, her blood pressure. Her tone wasn't frantic. It was methodical, clinical, like charting a patient on the edge of something critical. The next day, they met with a gray-haired elder law attorney named Marlene Fisk, whose eyes were sharp enough to peel paint. "He filed this as an emergency?" Marlene said, flipping the packet. "Classic intimidation play. Forces the court to act fast, hoping you won't." Elaine kept her voice even. "Then we don't wait." Marlene looked up. "You're willing to undergo a cognitive evaluation?" Elaine nodded. "Voluntarily? With independent oversight." Danielle placed a hand on her arm. "You don't have to prove anything." "I know," Elaine said. "But I will." That night, Elaine typed and printed a checklist she titled, "Documented Autonomy." It included a list of passwords, account balances, contacts for her pharmacist, and copies of every signed form Danielle had ever witnessed. She cross-referenced them with timestamps, bank statements, grocery receipts, and even thermostat settings. If Brian wanted a paper trail, she'd give him one. She left nothing open for interpretation, except for the things she couldn't document, the growing sense of violation, the knowing, bone deep, that Brian had been preparing this long before his first casserole, that every warm smile had been inventory, every phone call, a probe. At 10:42 p.m., her cell buzzed with a withheld number. She let it ring, then rang again. She turned the ringer off, and yet, when she turned toward her living room window to shut the curtains, she paused. Across the street, a dark SUV idled, engine running. No dome light, just heat-fogged glass. It didn't move. Elaine's hand froze on the curtain string. So it begins, she thought. Elaine sat in a beige room that smelled faintly of toner and institutional carpet cleaner, her coat folded over her lap and her pen poised in hand. The neuropsychologist's office was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that made people second-guess themselves. She didn't. A clipboard sat before her, the pages thick with boxes, patterns, sequences, and paragraphs to recall. A younger woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense ponytail introduced herself as Dr. Alina Groves, neutral tone, sterile posture, trained to read the tiny signs of deterioration. Elaine nodded politely. "We'll be going through a series of tasks to assess memory, reasoning, language, and executive function," Dr. Groves explained. "You can take breaks if needed." "I won't need them," Elaine said, not out of pride, but certainty. The test began. Elaine recited sequences backward. She sketched intersecting shapes with crisp lines. She remembered 5 unrelated words after 10 minutes, twice. At one point, Dr. Groves raised an eyebrow, slightly impressed. 2 hours later, the session ended with a final question. "What do you believe is happening in your life right now that brought you here?" Elaine paused only to choose the right phrasing. My son is attempting to take control of my legal and financial autonomy under the false pretense of cognitive decline. I agreed to this evaluation voluntarily to prove otherwise." Dr. Groves said nothing for a moment, just clicked her pen and made a final note. "I'll write up the summary and send it to your attorney." Elaine stood. "I'll wait for the facts myself." 3 days later, Marlene called her at home. "Elaine," she said, voice laced with restrained delight, "you didn't just pass. You exceeded. Your visuospatial and working memory scores were in the 98th percentile." Elaine exhaled. "Not relief, validation." Marlene continued, "I've already filed a motion to dismiss the guardianship petition on grounds of incapacity being demonstrably false. Now I'm digging into something else." Elaine turned toward the filing cabinet in her den. "What something?" "Your husband's estate." That stopped her cold. "There were transfers made," Marlene said, "near the end of his life, quiet ones. Do you recall giving Brian power of attorney over Charles?" Elaine's breath caught. Charles did, years ago. I didn't look too closely. He trusted Brian." Marlene made a sound between a sigh and a grunt. "I'm looking at a string of withdrawals from your joint account during Charles's last hospitalization. Thousands. Transferred to a secondary checking account Brian opened in his name only." Elaine sat down slowly at her desk. "Are you saying—" "I'm saying this didn't start with you." Danielle arrived that afternoon with a stack of frozen meals and a face like thunder. Elaine met her at the door, holding the printout from Marlene in one hand. "He stole from Dad?" Danielle asked, staring down at the account summaries. "Before he died," Elaine said quietly. "While we were in and out of the hospital, he was siphoning." Danielle dropped the grocery bag with a sharp thud on the counter. "Unbelievable. He's been planting this idea that you're losing it, while he was cashing out your future." Elaine nodded slowly. "He was laying the groundwork, the casseroles, the fake concern. He didn't just wake up and decide I was incompetent. He's been grooming that story for months." "Before the funeral," Danielle said. Elaine looked up. Her voice was calm, but a vein of steel threaded through it. "Before the stroke, before the DNR, before the last ICU stay." Danielle's face shifted. "You think he was planning even back then?" "I think," Elaine said, "that while I was charting vitals and holding your uncle's hand at 3 a.m., Brian was watching the clock. Not for his father, but for my window." Danielle sat at the kitchen table, stunned. It's sociopathic." Elaine picked up the logbook from the countertop, flipped to that morning's entry, and added a note in the margin. "Pattern recognition equals intact." She looked back at Danielle. "He thinks this is about competency." "It's not." Danielle blinked. "Then what is it?" Elaine closed the notebook. "Compliance." Outside, the snow had started again, quiet but steady, the kind that didn't melt right away, the kind that buried things. Her fax machine whirred to life in the other room. One long confirmation beep. She stood, calm and deliberate, and walked toward the sound. The frost on the bank's glass doors hadn't melted by the time Elaine stepped inside. Her boots squeaked against the tiled floor, the air thick with the smell of printer ink and artificial pine from a too-late holiday candle burning behind the teller line. She approached the counter with her purse tucked tightly beneath her arm, the keys to Box 327 wrapped in a tissue in her coat pocket. The woman behind the glass, young and chewing the end of a pen, blinked when Elaine handed over the slip. "You'll need ID," she said, sliding a laminated placard toward her. Elaine pulled out her driver's license and the secondary key that had lived untouched in the bottom drawer of Charles's desk since the Reagan administration. "I believe this box was jointly held under Charles and Elaine Mercer." The clerk typed something, squinted at the screen. "Still active," she confirmed. "Been a while, though." "Last accessed," she frowned. "1996? Elaine didn't flinch. "I'd like to see it now." They led her down a quiet hallway lined with metal drawers, each stamped with dull brass numbers. The clerk turned the keys, one from each of them, and with a soft click, the box slid out. "I'll give you privacy," she said, and left Elaine alone in the viewing room. The walls were paneled in dull beige, and the lighting buzzed faintly overhead. Elaine sat down at the little table and opened the box. Inside, a stack of yellowed paper tied with twine, a small velvet pouch, and an envelope marked Charles, Private. No jewelry, no birth certificates or war medals, just paper. She untied the stack first. The pages were handwritten, lined pages torn from spiral notebooks, margins crowded with numbers, dates, initials. It was Charles's handwriting, clean, structured. He'd recorded every payment made on their first mortgage, every quarterly dividend, every utility bill from 1984 to 1993. But the later pages shifted tone, notes scrawled with urgency, check numbers circled, underlined words like duplicate and reissued. Then a single line in red ink. Brian forged check number 1186, discovered after February 1995, balance didn't match. Elaine's pulse thumped, low and slow. Her eyes swept back across the page, confirming the notation, the signature comparison sketches. Charles hadn't said anything at the time, or maybe he had, and she hadn't heard it right. Those last years before the heart attacks, he'd grown quieter, less prone to confrontation, but not oblivious. Her hand trembled slightly as she reached for the second envelope. Inside, a single folded page. It was old, creased a dozen ways. She opened it carefully. "I'm sorry, Dad. I didn't mean to. I needed the money for that stereo. I'll pay it back. Please don't tell Mom. Brian, age 17. The signature at the bottom was unmistakable. Elaine set the letter down like it burned. The silence in the room pressed in around her, sharp and cold. She stared at the folded page until the words blurred. She had scrubbed Brian's scraped knees. She'd stayed up through fevers, cried over his report cards, bought him his first suit, believed it was the company's fault when he lost his job, believed it again when he said his marriage fell apart because of her, the clingy wife. She'd believed, even when belief came at the cost of her dignity. And all along, he'd been counting on that belief like interest. She pulled out her notebook and began copying key entries from the ledgers, check numbers, amounts, dates. She listed the confession letter, scanned a copy with her phone, forwarded it to Marlene with a subject line that read, "Evidence, timeline begins 1995. When she emerged from the vault room, the clerk gave her a half-curious glance. Elaine didn't meet her eyes. By the time she reached her car, the wind had picked up again. It whipped across the windshield, howling like something ancient and offended. She sat behind the wheel for a long moment, hands still gripping the box. She was heartbroken and furious and just getting warmed up. Her phone buzzed on the passenger seat. Unknown caller. She let it ring once, twice, then answered. Her voice was level. "This is Elaine Mercer." The room smelled like old coffee and too many coats drying on radiators. It was the basement of the municipal library, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, gray linoleum scuffed and dented from folding chairs scraped over decades. A taped-up sign near the door read, "Guardianship Support Circle, 2nd and 4th Thursdays. Confidentiality required." Elaine took a seat near the back, keeping her coat wrapped tight around her. 12 other people dotted the circle, mostly women, mostly gray-haired, mostly silent in that wary, exhausted way that only people in long fights learned how to carry. A volunteer named Alma introduced the group with the gentle authority of someone who'd earned every line on her face. "This isn't therapy," she said. "We don't offer advice and we don't take sides. What we do is listen, because most of the time, that's the thing nobody else is doing." They went around the room. One man's daughter had moved him into a facility and sold his house before he realized what was happening. A woman named Rhonda had spent 6 years in court trying to regain access to her own pension. Another woman, eyes rimmed red, whispered that her grandson had filed for guardianship the same week she'd denied him a loan. When it came to Elaine, she simply said, "My son filed for full guardianship." Said, "I'm confused. I scored 98th percentile on my cognitive exam last week." A few nods, one soft, bitter chuckle. Rhonda leaned forward. "They don't need a diagnosis anymore. They just need a judge who hasn't had lunch yet." Later, as the group broke for coffee and paper cookies, a woman with cropped silver hair and a cane sat beside Elaine. He started calling me forgetful when I asked for receipts, she said, her voice low. Then he told the court I was mixing up names, said I was leaving the stove on. I live in a building with no gas. Elaine blinked. The woman nodded. They use the language of love to get the power of law. Elaine opened her notebook. Can I quote you on that? The woman smiled without teeth. Hell yes. That night, back in her living room, Elaine sat beneath the amber glow of her floor lamp and powered on her old laptop. Danielle had rigged up a webcam the week before, just in case the court wants to hear directly from you, she'd said. Now, Elaine clicked, record. The screen reflected her own face back at her, lined, firm, unblinking. My name is Elaine Mercer, she began. I'm 74 years old. I was a registered ICU nurse for over 3 decades. I managed ventilators, death notifications, trauma codes, and terrified families. And never once, not once, was I accused of being confused. She paused. Her fingers curled against her knee. My son is trying to paint me as unstable so he can control what I've built, but I am not losing my mind. I am losing my patience. Another pause. I have logged every conversation, every account transaction, every memory test, and every lie I can prove. And I'm going to testify. She ended the recording, saved it to 3 places. Across the room, her phone buzzed. Brian, 7 missed calls. She turned it face down. 3 days later, she stood in front of her mirror wearing a navy pantsuit that still fit like it had 10 years ago. Danielle had offered to buy her something new, but Elaine wanted this one, the one she wore to Charles's last hospital board award dinner. Her notebook was in her bag, her records printed and tabbed, her witness letter from Dr. Levin folded beneath a statement from the neuropsychologist. Everything was in order, except her nerves. Her hands were steady, but something inside her chest fluttered, like the tremble of a high wire before the first footstep. She walked to her desk, opened the drawer, and pulled out the USB with the video file, clipped it to her legal binder. Then she heard it. A sound outside the window, slow tires against icy pavement, a car idling at the end of her driveway. Her motion light clicked on. She didn't go to the window. She reached for the phone instead and pressed record. Danielle burst through the front door like a gust of wind, her cheeks flushed with cold and adrenaline. Elaine looked up from her breakfast, spoon halfway to her mouth. You okay? Danielle dropped her phone on the kitchen table with a clatter. You need to see this. Elaine set the spoon down carefully. Danielle pulled up an online listing, an auction page from a collector's marketplace. The item description was vague, but the photo was not. A teardrop sapphire pendant on a gold chain. Elaine leaned closer, her pulse tightening. That's mine, she said. Charles gave it to me for our 25th anniversary. Danielle swiped to the next listing, a cameo brooch Elaine hadn't worn since Rhonda's wedding in '09. Then a third, pearl studs with the distinctive curved backs she'd always insisted on because clip-ons pinched. He's been selling them, Danielle said, voice sharp. Quietly, under a username linked to one of his old business accounts. Estate liquidation, my ass. Elaine didn't speak. She stood, walked to the narrow bookshelf in the living room and pulled down a photo album. Page by page, she flipped through memories, Easters, anniversaries, formal nights at the hospital charity galas. In each one, the jewelry gleamed unmistakably. She pointed to the pendant in one photo. That was 2004, and this one, she tapped the brooch on another page, Rhonda's wedding. I never gave him permission to sell a damn thing. Danielle had already started taking photos of the album pages. It got worse. One of the listings had a public buyer review. Elaine read the comment aloud, voice flat. Gorgeous vintage find. Estate jewelry with provenance. Seller says from elderly mother downsizing. She turned the page in the album with deliberate care. He didn't just steal, she said. He marketed me as dead weight. Danielle forwarded the screenshots to Marlene, attaching Elaine's statement and the corroborating photo evidence. By 3 p.m., Elaine's attorney filed a new motion, intentional fraud by petitioner. It shifted everything. This wasn't just a guardianship dispute anymore. It wasn't a gray area of who knows best. Now there were receipts, Sales, profit, deception across state lines, the legal battle had stepped into criminal shadow. The next morning, the court clerk called. Brian's legal team had requested a continuance. Of course they did, Marlene muttered, pacing Elaine's living room. They smell the smoke and want time to put out the fire. Can they stall? Elaine asked. They can try, but I'm about to make sure that door slams shut. Danielle was at the kitchen table, highlighting documents and printing annotated timelines. The judge said discovery needed to be submitted by Monday. They're out of runway. That afternoon, the courthouse clerk called back. Motion denied. The hearing would proceed on schedule. Elaine stood by the window, watching the wind kick up fine powder across her front yard like sifted flour. Her hands were steady, her thoughts precise. She walked to the hall closet and pulled down a small, dusty fireproof lockbox. Inside were the few remaining heirlooms: her mother's silver locket, a war medal from Charles's father, and a tiny sapphire ring she hadn't worn since her engagement. Still there, untouched. She didn't cry. She did, however, reach into the bottom of the box and pull out a folded receipt, the original appraisal for the pendant Brian had sold. She didn't remember saving it, but Charles had filed everything. Danielle read over her shoulder. That alone makes the theft a felony in this state. Elaine smiled, thin, not joyful. Then I hope he gets a good seat in court. That evening, the house phone rang. Brian. Home. Danielle reached to unplug the base, but Elaine held up a hand. No need. She let it ring. Once, twice, 3 times. Then voicemail picked up. Brian's voice came through the speaker, hesitant, rehearsed, like a man whose bluff had started to backfire. Mom, call me. We need to talk before this gets worse. Elaine walked across the room, pressed the delete button mid-sentence, and turned back to Danielle. Too late. The courtroom smelled like varnish and nerves. Elaine sat straight-backed at the petitioner's table, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Her binder, tabbed and color-coded, rested beside her water bottle. Danielle sat to her right, Marlene to her left, flipping through notes with the casual precision of someone who knew exactly when to bare teeth. Across the aisle, Brian sat with his lawyer, slick, suited, mid-40s, who spoke to him in a low whisper as if coaching him for a talent show. Brian's posture was rehearsed, somber tie, remorseful tilt to the head, a man trying to look burdened by responsibility. Court is now in session, the clerk announced, Judge Halverson presiding. The judge, a balding man in his 60s with drooping jowls and no time for theater, adjusted his glasses and looked directly at Brian's attorney. You may proceed. Brian's lawyer stood with forced solemnity. Your Honor, this petition stems from deep concern, not malice. My client, Mr. Brian Mercer, has observed troubling behavior in his mother over the past several months. Instances of forgetfulness, mismanagement of daily affairs, emotional volatility. She lives alone, and despite her best intentions, has become increasingly isolated. Elaine sat still, absorbing each word like a boxer taking blows on the gloves. She has refused offers of help, the attorney continued, and her current power of attorney, a niece with no medical or legal background, may be enabling further decline rather than providing support. Marlene rose slowly. Your Honor, I'd like to submit a court-certified cognitive evaluation completed by Dr. Alina Groves, as well as a supporting letter from Dr. Harold Levin, her long-term primary care physician. Both confirm, emphatically, that Ms. Mercer exhibits no signs of dementia, confusion, or cognitive deterioration. She handed the documents to the bailiff. They further recommend no intervention and affirm her capacity to make autonomous legal and financial decisions. Judge Halverson flipped through the first page. Grunted. Noted, Marlene continued. I'd also like to call Ms. Danielle Marston to the stand. Danielle rose, straightened her shoulders, and walked with unflinching clarity to the witness chair. She took the oath with a voice steady as snowfall. Ms. Marston, Marlene began, can you describe your aunt's daily routine? She wakes up around 6, makes coffee, reads the Detroit Free Press, logs her medication and blood pressure. She tracks every payment and withdrawal on paper, and in a spreadsheet I helped her format. Marlene nodded. And her decision to assign you power of attorney, was that requested by you? Danielle shook her head. Number she told me her reasons were rooted in past concerns about Brian's financial behavior. She wanted someone with no conflict of interest. Brian leaned over and whispered something to his lawyer, who then stood. Ms. Marston, you're a high school science teacher, correct? Yes. Not a medical doctor. No. And you live 30 miles away from your aunt? 33. Then would you say you're truly equipped to monitor the well-being of an elderly woman living alone? Danielle didn't flinch. You don't need a stethoscope to recognize integrity. A few quiet coughs broke out in the gallery. The lawyer hesitated, then sat down. Judge Halverson turned to Marlene. Call your next witness. Elaine stood before she was asked. Her heels made soft clicks against the tile floor as she walked to the stand. She adjusted the microphone, met the judge's gaze squarely. Do you swear to tell the truth? The bailiff asked. I always have, she replied. Judge Halverson leaned forward. Ms. Mercer, are you aware of the petition before this court? I am. And do you contest it? With every breath in me. Marlene approached, setting a copy of the binder on the rail. Ms. Mercer, is it true you prepared this logbook of your daily activities? Yes. Why? Elaine looked directly at Brian for the first time. Because I knew my son was building a case, so I built mine. Brian shifted in his seat. His jaw ticked. The courtroom settled into a silence so sharp it hummed. Please continue, the judge said. Elaine reached into her folder, removed a folded letter, and set it on the railing. This is a confession, handwritten, from my son. When he was 17, he stole from his father. He's been perfecting the skill ever since. Judge Halverson's brows lifted. Marlene took the letter. This will be entered as evidence. Brian's lawyer stood quickly. Objection, relevance, and prejudicial impact? Overruled, the judge snapped. Let her speak. Elaine turned back to the bench. Her voice was calm but ironclad. I am not confused. I am not unstable. I am not your burden. I am your mother. And I still know the difference between help and a hostile takeover. The judge didn't blink. He turned a page in the file and said, Ms. Mercer, please remain on the stand. I have a few questions of my own. Elaine adjusted her reading glasses and unfolded the letter with deliberate care, the crease marks still crisp after nearly 6 decades. Her fingers didn't tremble. Her voice didn't waver. This was written by my son, Brian Mercer, at the age of 17, she said, eyes steady on the judge. Found in my late husband's bank box. It was never meant to be seen again, but we're long past silence. She began to read. I'm sorry, Dad. I didn't mean to. I needed the money for that stereo. I'll pay it back. Please don't tell Mom. Brian. She looked up. That was after he forged a check. Charles, my husband, documented it. He noted the signature discrepancies. We kept it private, because we thought he'd grow out of it. Elaine's eyes swept across the courtroom, briefly landing on Brian. He stared at the table. But it didn't stop. It evolved. She opened her notebook to a page filled with bullet points, tight and neat. Between 2005 and 2014, while my husband was hospitalized multiple times for heart complications, Brian held his power of attorney. During that period, over $37,000 were transferred into accounts in Brian's name. Marlene stood and approached the bench. Your Honor, we've submitted documentation supporting those transfers, as well as notarized ledgers from Mr. Mercer's personal records. Judge Halverson held up a hand. I've reviewed them, Elaine continued. Then came the jewelry, estate listings, public reviews, and now this guardianship petition, based not in concern, but in calculation. Brian's attorney stood, clearing his throat. Your Honor, I must object to the characterization. My client— Sit down, Judge Halverson said, without raising his voice. The attorney hesitated, then obeyed. Elaine reached into her binder and removed a USB. Danielle stood from the gallery and stepped forward to hand it to the bailiff. This is a personal statement, Elaine said. Recorded 3 days ago. I'd like the court to hear it. The judge nodded. The bailiff plugged the drive into the courtroom laptop. The monitor flickered, then filled with a still image of Elaine, sitting beneath her floor lamp, her face composed and calm. The courtroom held its breath. "My name is Elaine Mercer," her recorded voice said, clear and unwavering. "I'm 74 years old. I'm a widow, a retired ICU nurse, and a mother. What I'm not is delusional, confused, or dangerous to myself. What I am is inconvenient to someone who thought I wouldn't fight back." The room remained frozen. Even Brian had stopped shifting in his seat. "My son doesn't want to help me. He wants to manage me, silence me, reclaim the power he thinks he lost when I said no." Elaine's real-time self sat at the witness stand, watching the playback with clinical detachment. The video faded to black. Judge Halverson leaned forward. "Do you stand by that statement?" "I do." He folded his hands atop the file in front of him. "Ms. Mercer, your documentation is thorough. Your evaluations are irrefutable. Your testimony is consistent and credible." He looked to Brian. "Mr. Mercer, your petition lacked substantiated medical evidence. Your financial involvement with your late father's estate and subsequent sales of your mother's possessions raised troubling ethical questions." Elaine did not smile. She did not blink. "I am denying the guardianship petition," the judge said. Brian exhaled, but the sound wasn't relief. It was disbelief. Judge Halverson continued, voice even. "Furthermore, I am forwarding this matter to the county prosecutor for financial investigation and review of potential elder exploitation. Ms. Fisk, you may coordinate with the district attorney's office directly." Gasps rippled through the gallery. Brian shot to his feet. "What? No, Your Honor, this is a misunderstanding. She's twisting—" "Sit down, Mr. Mercer." Brian looked like he might bolt. Instead, he sat. The gavel never came down. It didn't need to. The silence had the finality of judgment. Outside the courtroom, reporters waited like vultures in parkas. Elaine didn't speak to them. Danielle acted as her buffer, leading her down the marble steps and toward the waiting car. Elaine paused at the curb. Behind them, Brian emerged from the courthouse, his lawyer a pace behind. For the first time, he looked small, hair mussed, coat wrinkled, eyes darting for control that wasn't there. He caught Elaine's gaze. She didn't flinch. She didn't speak. She got in the car and closed the door behind her. Only once it pulled away did she finally let her shoulders drop, not in defeat, in release. But when she turned her phone back on, there was a new voicemail. Blocked number. 42 seconds long. She played it once, then twice. No voice, just breathing, and something that sounded like a match striking. The courthouse elevator hummed downward with a mechanical whine, the kind that always sounded like something straining not to break. Elaine stood near the back, arms crossed loosely, binder hugged to her side. Danielle was a step ahead, already texting Marlene a thank you and confirming next steps with the DA's assistant. The doors parted on the lobby level, and there he was. Brian. Waiting. He stepped forward just as Danielle looked up. "No," Danielle said instantly, stepping between them. Elaine touched her niece's arm gently. "It's all right." Brian's face was red around the edges, like the blood couldn't figure out where to go, rage or shame. His coat hung open, damp from melted snow, tie loosened like he'd ripped it off in a hallway somewhere. "You smug as hell right now?" he said through clenched teeth. "You happy? Dragging me through this circus?" Elaine didn't blink. "I didn't drag you anywhere, Brian. You built this tent. I just brought a flashlight." He stepped closer. Too close. "You've embarrassed me. You've embarrassed yourself. Over what? Some earrings? Some paranoid obsession that everyone's out to get you?" Danielle took a sharp step forward, but Elaine stopped her with just a glance. "Stop calling it concern," Elaine said calmly. "You weren't trying to protect me." You were trying to preserve access." Brian's laugh was bitter and jagged. "You really think you're in the clear? The hearing's done, but the internet never forgets. You made this public. You made me public. I didn't ask for cameras, but I'm not hiding from them either." Brian's voice dropped low, dangerous. "You want to be a martyr, go ahead, but don't think you're walking away clean. I hope whatever petty satisfaction you feel now was worth the wreckage you've made of this family." Elaine's expression didn't shift. "I gave you everything," she said, voice like glass cracking beneath weight. "Every chance, every benefit of the doubt, every quiet decision that kept your name out of courtrooms until now. And now?" She leaned in, voice lower, eyes locked. "I'm taking back what's mine." Brian's mouth opened, but security arrived before the sound did. "Sir," one of the guards said, a tall woman with a walkie clipped to her belt, "we need you to exit the building. Now." Brian's eyes darted between Elaine and the guard. "You called them?" "No," Elaine said, "but I'm glad they came." He didn't resist, just spat a sharp breath through his nose, turned, and stalked out toward the glass doors. His footsteps echoed across the marble as if the building itself was pushing him out. Danielle exhaled hard. Elaine didn't. Not yet. They stepped outside into the cold. The Michigan sky was a soft bruise, gray and fading. Elaine pulled out her phone, tapped open the DA's intake form she'd been sent the night before. "I want him barred permanently from acting as power of attorney, fiduciary, or legal guardian for anyone over the age of 60, she said to Danielle. "Not just for me, for anyone." Danielle blinked. "You can file that?" "With the affidavit Marlene drafted? Yes, the judge's referral gave us traction. I'm not going to waste it." They walked to the parking structure, boots thudding softly against the salt-dusted sidewalk. Elaine's phone buzzed again before they reached the car. She glanced down. "Unknown number. Voicemail received." She didn't play it yet. She slipped the phone into her coat pocket, tucked her scarf tighter, and looked at Danielle. "You hungry?" Danielle gave her a smile. "Are you?" Elaine finally smiled back. "Ravenous." They drove off as streetlights blinked on behind them. Across town, in the district attorney's office, a paralegal flagged a file from the inbox. Subject line, "Guardianship petition fraud, Mercer case, referral by Judge Halverson." She forwarded it up the chain. And 10 minutes later, someone from the Financial Crimes Division picked up the phone. "Let's open a file." The back door was ajar when Elaine returned from the hardware store. It was barely noticeable at first, just a sliver of air between wood and frame. But the deadbolt was twisted wrong, and the door jamb splintered in a way no wind had ever managed. Elaine stopped cold on the threshold. She didn't call out, didn't step inside. Instead, she set her bag down gently, pulled out her phone, and dialed 911. "This is Elaine Mercer," she said, voice even. "I believe my home's been broken into. The door's been forced. I haven't entered yet." The dispatcher's voice was calm, practiced. "Officers would arrive within 7 minutes. Stay outside. Don't touch anything." Elaine nodded, though no one could see her, and waited by the mailbox. She didn't feel scared, not exactly. She felt still, the same stillness she'd felt standing over a coding patient while the monitor flatlined and the room filled with hands and static. That slow-motion clarity before everything erupted. 2 cruisers arrived fast. One officer circled the back while another approached her gently, respectfully. They cleared the house within minutes. "No one's inside," the taller officer said. "But you were right. Entry was forced." Elaine stepped inside only when given the all-clear. Nothing had been ransacked, no shattered lamps, no drawers flung open. But when she opened the cabinet above her desk, where she kept the labeled file folders, a backup USB, her original will, her breath caught. Empty. Every document was gone. Not the copies, the originals. She closed the cabinet slowly, turned. "I'd like the room dusted," she said. The officers exchanged a glance. One nodded and radioed for a technician. An hour later, she stood in the living room while a forensics team dusted smooth surfaces and bagged prints. The lead technician approached her with gloved hands. "We got a clean partial on the desk knob," he said, "and 2 good ones on the back door handle." Elaine raised an eyebrow. "Can you run them?" "We already are." He hesitated, then added, "You have someone in mind?" Elaine didn't answer. She didn't need to. The call from the station came the next morning. "Prints match Brian Mercer," the officer said. Danielle was already pacing when Elaine told her. "He broke into your house?" she exploded. "For what? The originals?" To try to prove something or bury it? Elaine was calm. He took what he couldn't control. That's a line, Danielle said. He crossed a line. Elaine already had the county website open. She clicked through the restraining order forms like a nurse filling out an intake chart. Name, relationship, location of incident, known threats. I'm filing now, she said. Danielle sat beside her, jaw clenched. You need to come stay with me, seriously, even if it's just for a week. Elaine shook her head. If I leave, he wins. Danielle blinked. This isn't a metaphor. He broke in. You could have been home. I wasn't, Elaine said, eyes still on the screen. And next time, he won't make it through the door. Danielle opened her mouth to argue, but Elaine turned the laptop toward her. Help me pick security cameras. Danielle stared, then sighed. Okay, fine, but we're doing full perimeter, motion sensors, floodlights, and cloud backups. I want something that pings my phone if he so much as breathes near your lawn. Elaine nodded. Good, let's also change the locks, all of them, and I want an alarm panel by every door. They ordered everything by dinner. By noon the next day, the hardware van was in her driveway, and the front porch had a new steel-reinforced deadbolt. A technician showed her how to access footage on her phone and walked her through the panic button on the base panel, twice. Elaine listened carefully, took notes. After they left, she poured herself a cup of tea. No sugar, just heat and calm. She sat by the window and watched the front lawn. Clean, white, still. Then the doorbell rang. She stood, walked to the monitor, pressed play. The camera feed lit up. Brian, standing on the sidewalk, holding something small and silver in his hand, smiling like it was nothing. The courtroom was half full this time, no press, no arguments, just silence, protocol, and a single gavel tap from Judge Halverson as he signed the protective order with a thick black pen. Mr. Mercer, the judge said without looking up, you are hereby barred from coming within 100 feet of your mother's home, person, finances, or designated power of attorney. Violations will result in immediate arrest. Brian stood next to his court-appointed attorney, jaw tight, tie askew like he hadn't learned anything since the last hearing. Elaine sat with Marlene in the front row. Danielle gripped her hand, her fingers firm and warm. The judge turned to Elaine. Ms. Mercer, we regret that this was necessary, but we commend your clarity and your strength. Elaine didn't speak. She only nodded once. Outside, reporters were waiting again, but this time she didn't turn away. Her coat cinched tight against the wind, she stepped up to the microphones, flanked by Danielle and Marlene. I'm not here because I'm weak, Elaine began. I'm here because someone thought I was. The murmurs in the crowd stopped cold. This isn't just my story. It's thousands of people's stories. Elders are targeted because we raised our children to expect love and didn't prepare for betrayal. A young reporter stepped forward. What do you want to see happen next, Ms. Mercer? Elaine didn't blink. Consequences. The clip aired on the 6 o'clock news, then the 10th. Then the national feed picked it up. Danielle's phone exploded with notifications. By morning, #JusticeForElaine was trending. But the real moment came 2 days later when Danielle opened a small envelope from the Elder Legal Fund of Michigan. Inside was a check for $22,400 in grassroots donations, with a note that read, "For every mother who still knows her mind." Danielle cried. Elaine didn't. She was busy faxing over the final edits to her will. The financial exploitation case moved faster than anyone expected. The forensic reports were airtight. The check history, the jewelry sales, the forged notations, all laid bare. Brian's lawyer negotiated a plea. He avoided jail but lost everything else: his brokerage license, his ability to serve as a fiduciary, and all current POA privileges. His name was now in the Elder Protection Database. Elaine was notified by email. She read the last line 3 times. Subject permanently disqualified from acting in any legal fiduciary capacity involving senior citizens. She closed her laptop. Breathed. Not victory. Just breathe. Later that afternoon, she stood at the kitchen counter with a fresh copy of her amended will. The lawyer had offered to mail it back, but she'd insisted on a print version. tangible, weighty. Danielle sat across from her, fidgeting with a tea bag. "You sure you want to do this?" Elaine nodded. Her hand moved smoothly as she signed the last page. "You're getting everything," she said, "and half of it you'll donate." Danielle blinked. "You want me to give it away?" Elaine smiled. "To the non-profit legal clinic we found, the one helping fight fraudulent guardianships." Danielle let out a long breath. "You're building a legacy." "I'm correcting one." Elaine slid the pen across the counter. "Witness signature, please." Danielle signed. Outside, the snow had started again, soft and slow. Elaine stood, walked to her file cabinet, and locked the document inside. The steel drawer slid shut with a satisfying click. Then the doorbell rang. This time she didn't check the camera. Danielle answered. A woman stood holding a clipboard, bundled in a heavy scarf and red gloves. Middle-aged, nervous, polite. "Hi," she said. "Sorry to bother you. Is this the Elaine Mercer from the news? I saw the story. My mom is going through something similar. I didn't know where else to turn." Danielle turned to Elaine. Elaine stepped forward, calm and certain. She opened the door wider. "Come in," she said. The soil was still stiff beneath her gloves, half frozen and stubborn from the late March thaw, but Elaine didn't mind. She pressed her trowel into the ground with practiced rhythm, coaxing old roots from cold earth. The hydrangea bed had suffered. So had the fence. So had she. But all of it could be rebuilt. A wheelbarrow leaned against the shed, half filled with weeds and brittle stalks she'd cleared that morning. She wore Charles's old work jacket, sleeves rolled and buttons mismatched, stained with years of mulch and paint but still warm. Danielle's voice floated from inside the house. She was on the phone again. Another press interview. Another community center wanting to host an event. Another senior asking, "Can Elaine speak?" Elaine smiled faintly and pressed her palm into the soil. It felt good to be asked. The woman with the clipboard, Marjorie, had come back the next week with 2 more people. Then 5. Then 12. Danielle turned the living room into a makeshift planning zone, whiteboard and sticky notes and old coffee cups marking the start of something neither of them had planned for. They called it Guardian Watch. It was just a newsletter at first, then a meeting space at the senior center, then a booth at the Springtown Fair. Elaine gave one talk. Just one. No script, no fanfare. She told her story straight, handed out checklists, and answered every question with calm authority. She never raised her voice. She didn't have to. By June, they were planning an Elder Fraud Awareness Summit, local sponsors, a modest crowd, but the library had donated space, and the high school AV club volunteered to live stream it. "Quiet hero," the senior center director had called her. Elaine had smiled, then quietly declined the plaque. She didn't want her name carved in bronze. She wanted it remembered in ink, on documents, on forms, on POAs that said no when the wrong people asked for yes. Her knees creaked as she stood from the garden bed. She wiped her gloves on her jeans and surveyed the small backyard, trimmed, prepped, lined with fresh wood chips. Danielle had helped replant the winter kale. The bulbs had taken, daffodils, hyacinth, tulips, a season away from bloom. Elaine breathed deep, cold air, pine mulch, the faintest whisper of the lilacs preparing to wake. Her joints ached more than they used to. Her eyesight dimmed faster by evening. But her mind was as sharp as it had ever been. She pulled the small speaker from her jacket pocket and played one of Charles's old jazz tapes, something brassy and slow. She set it on the porch step, the horns drifting into the late afternoon. Inside, Danielle was laughing on the phone. Elaine didn't know who with, but the sound was clean, light. She picked up her spade again, then paused. At the far end of the yard, just past the fence, 2 figures appeared. Women in their 60s, maybe early 70s. One held a clipboard, the other carried a folded lawn chair. Elaine waved them in through the gate. "You're early," she said. "We start the new workshop tomorrow." One of them smiled. "We know, we just didn't want to be late." Elaine nodded and set down the spade. The 3 of them walked toward the shed, the garden rustling behind them like something waking from sleep. The letter arrived with no return address, just a plain white envelope, tucked between a water bill and a catalog for mobility scooters. Danielle had brought in the mail and nearly tossed it with the junk until she saw Elaine's name written in the familiar, slanted scrawl. Elaine took it in silence. She didn't open it right away. Instead, she placed it on the kitchen table beside her mug, made a fresh pot of tea, and waited for the kettle to finish its soft hiss. She poured, stirred in a slice of lemon, and sat. Only then did she slide her thumb beneath the flap and pull the paper free. It was a single torn sheet of notebook paper. No date, no salutation, just a few words pressed in heavy graphite. You were right, I wasn't. No name, no apology, no return path. Just the faint impression of a hand that had finally stopped pretending it was clean. Elaine stared at the words for less than a minute, then she stood. The fireplace was already laid for the evening, birch logs and crumpled newspaper beneath the grate. She added the letter without ceremony. Struck a match. The flame licked it gently at first, then devoured it whole. The page curled at the corners, blackened, lifted in a brief sigh of smoke, and disappeared. She didn't look away. When the fire caught and steadied, she walked to her writing desk and opened the small iron key drawer. Inside was her will, original, notarized, revised, and final. She ran her fingers along the embossed seal, the sharp corners of each page, the ink as bold as the day she signed it. Her name was right where it belonged, and so was Danielle's, and beneath Danielle's share, a note. To be divided among vetted nonprofits assisting victims of elder coercion and fiduciary fraud. Elaine slid the will back into its folder and locked the drawer. She moved slowly that evening, not because she was tired, but because the quiet was sacred. A house no longer under siege, a name no longer up for debate. Outside, the first flurries of an early snow began to fall, light as ash, soft as breath. She wrapped her cardigan tight and moved to the living room, settling into the armchair that faced the bay window. The tea was still warm. Her phone buzzed once on the side table, a voicemail. She tapped it open and listened. A woman's voice, faint, uncertain. Hi, I was given your number, my father's lawyer. He changed everything when Dad was sick. We didn't realize until it was too late. I don't know if you help people, but I thought maybe you'd understand. Elaine stared out the window, the snowfall just beginning to coat the fence line and bird bath. The woman's voice ended softly. I don't want to lose what's left of him. Please call if you can. The message clicked off. Silence again. Elaine reached for her pen, jotted down the name, then took a long sip of her tea. She let the warmth bloom through her ribs. She let the silence settle again, not as absence, but as peace. And then, she smiled. She had decisions to make.